I woke up to the sound of nothing. No gentle splashing, no faint gurgle of the filter, no shimmering blue reflections dancing on my bedroom ceiling. Just eerie silence. Confused, I threw on some slippers and rushed outside, only to be greeted by a sight so absurd I momentarily thought I was still dreaming. My pool, my massive, meticulously maintained, expensive backyard pool, was empty. Not a drop of water. The once inviting, crystal-clear oasis now looked like a barren crater in the middle of my yard. Then I saw them. A group of HOA members stood at the edge of my property, arms folded smugly. Leading them was Karen McIntyre, the neighborhood's self-appointed queen of unnecessary rules and insufferable micromanagement. She stood there with her clipboard, an unmistakable smirk plastered across her face. "Good morning, Ethan," she called out, voice dripping with faux politeness. "I see you've noticed our little adjustment." My brain struggled to process the sheer insanity of what I was witnessing. "Adjustment," I echoed. "Karen, what the hell happened to my pool?" Karen let out a dramatic sigh, as if I were the unreasonable one. "The HOA board voted unanimously to drain it. We sent you a notice 2 weeks ago." She gestured toward my mailbox, where a bright yellow envelope stuck out like a warning flare. I snatched it up and ripped it open. HOA violation #237B, unauthorized water waste. Effective immediately. Fine, $2,500. I let out a hollow laugh, scanning the letter like it might suddenly make sense if I read it again. You actually drained my pool? Without my permission." Karen's smirk widened. "It's not about permission, Ethan. It's about responsibility. We're in a drought." I stared at her in disbelief. "Drought? The city hasn't declared one." "Well," she sniffed, "the HOA has. We must set an example." I blinked. "An example?" I gestured wildly toward the perfectly green, HOA-mandated golf course a few streets over, its sprinklers still blissfully spraying water into the air. "What about that? Or the ridiculous fountain at the community center? Or, oh, I don't know, the fact that I pay for my own damn water." Karen gave a fake, patronizing chuckle. "Oh, Ethan, homeowners don't always understand what's best for the community. That's why the HOA exists, to make difficult decisions on your behalf." I took a slow, measured breath, willing myself not to say something that would put me in legal trouble. "You drained my pool," I said, voice dangerously low, "for wasting water, even though I paid for it in a neighborhood that uses more water on decorative plants than an entire city block?" "That's correct." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to contain the sheer rage bubbling up inside me. "And if I refuse to pay this fine?" Karen's eyes practically sparkled with anticipation. "Then we put a lien on your house, of course." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. This was the kind of ridiculous, overreaching HOA nonsense I had heard about in horror stories. But draining an entire pool? That wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an outright power play. I took a step closer, locking eyes with Karen. "You know, Karen," I said slowly, voice deceptively calm, "I don't think you realize who you're messing with." Karen scoffed, clearly unbothered. "Oh, Ethan, don't be dramatic. Rules are rules." A laugh bubbled up in my throat. It wasn't amused. It was the kind of laugh that came from knowing something no one else did. The kind of laugh that sent a warning to whoever heard it. Because, oh, Karen had no idea. I took a deep breath, feeling the first flickers of satisfaction creep in despite my anger. "Let me ask you something, Karen. Where do you think the water in this neighborhood comes from?" Her smug expression faltered slightly. "The city, obviously." I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Wrong." Her frown deepened. "What?" I crossed my arms, letting the moment sink in. "You see, Karen, 20 years ago, when this neighborhood was being developed, the original landowners didn't sell the water rights to the city. They sold them to a private investor." Karen's eyebrows knitted together. "What does that have to do with anything?" I tilted my head slightly. That investor was me. Silence. Beautiful, weighty silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in Karen's head. She blinked. Twice. Then laughed, a forced, brittle sound. That's ridiculous. I shrugged. Is it? Her fingers gripped her clipboard a little tighter. You're lying. Am I? For the first time since I'd met her, Karen actually looked uncertain. I could see it, the way her confidence wavered for just a second, the way her shoulders stiffened. She didn't know. Because, of course, HOA presidents never actually read the fine print. I decided to twist the knife just a little deeper. You know that emergency water conservation fee you're about to impose on homeowners? I asked casually. It would be a shame if there wasn't any water to conserve. Karen's face paled. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a near whisper. You just picked a fight with the man who controls every drop of water in this neighborhood. She took a half step back, clearly trying to regain control. You can't just turn off the water. I smiled again. Can't I? Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. I clapped a hand on her shoulder in mock sympathy. Oh, Karen. You really should have read the contract. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, silent, shaken, and, for the first time in her life, completely powerless. Because tomorrow, this entire neighborhood was going to learn what it really meant to be at the mercy of the HOA's rules. And Karen? She was about to learn what it meant to be at the mercy of me. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. It was the perfect, peaceful scene, birds chirping, joggers making their morning rounds, sprinklers kicking on in synchronized bursts. The HOA's prized golf course, which had somehow evaded their so-called drought restrictions, was lush and green under the golden sunlight. It was almost a shame that all of this was about to change. Almost. I took one last sip of coffee, pulled out my phone, and made a single call. It took less than 5 minutes for the chaos to begin. The first sign was the sputtering of sprinklers. At first, people didn't think much of it. A slight drop in pressure, maybe a minor plumbing issue. Then it got worse. Hoses that had been left running slowed to a trickle before stopping entirely. A woman watering her garden stared in disbelief, as nothing but air wheezed out of her nozzle. And then came the yelling. The HOA president, Karen, had no idea what was happening yet, but I saw her storm out of her house in a bathrobe, phone pressed to her ear as she stomped toward the HOA office. Other board members quickly joined, looking equally confused. I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee as Karen's usually smug expression twisted into one of pure frustration. Then came the real panic. Residents began knocking on each other's doors, murmuring about the sudden outage. A man in gym clothes tried his kitchen faucet and swore loudly when nothing came out. A woman with a half-full bathtub stared at it like it was her last supply of fresh water on earth. Then the HOA's beloved golf course sprinklers cut off mid-cycle, leaving the greens dry and vulnerable under the scorching sun. The decorative fountain in front of the community center gurgled for a few seconds before collapsing into stillness. Karen's voice, usually a condescending purr, turned into a shrill bark. She was barking orders at her fellow board members, but they all looked helpless. She waved her phone in the air, as if she could threaten the water back into existence. I knew exactly what she was doing. Calling the city. She would be in for quite the surprise. I stood up and stretched before casually walking down the street toward the HOA office, pretending to be just another confused homeowner. The crowd had gathered outside, people demanding answers from Karen, who looked like she was moments away from a full-blown meltdown. "Everyone, please remain calm," she said, though her voice was anything but. "We're working on identifying the issue, and we'll have water restored as soon as possible." A few homeowners looked skeptical, arms crossed. One woman in a bathrobe raised an eyebrow. "So it's an issue now? I thought the HOA was all about conserving water." Karen's eye twitched, but she forced a smile. "Yes, and conservation is important, but this is an unexpected infrastructure failure. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Karen spotted me in the crowd, and her face twisted into something between suspicion and barely contained rage. "Ethan," she said, voice tight, "do you know anything about this?" I took a moment to savor the moment, then gave a casual shrug. "Me? Oh, I don't know, Karen. I thought the HOA was supposed to handle all our water needs. Isn't that why you drained my pool? To teach us about responsibility." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were starting to connect the dots. Karen's own logic was coming back to bite her. Karen's patience was thinning. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she snapped. I tilted my head. "You think I'm enjoying the fact that my neighbors don't have running water?" "No, Karen, that sounds awful. But I will say it's fascinating how quickly the HOA is panicking now that you don't have total control over the situation." She glared at me, then turned to one of the board members. "Get the city on the phone. Now." The man nodded and made a call, his expression shifting rapidly from hopeful to pale. He lowered the phone, looking at Karen with barely disguised fear. "The city says they don't control our water." Karen's jaw clenched. "That's ridiculous." "Of course they do." I smiled. "No, Karen. They don't." The crowd went silent. The realization hit her like a truck. I let the moment hang in the air before stepping forward, hands in my pockets. "You see, years ago, when this neighborhood was developed, the city never actually purchased the water rights. They assumed they would have access when the time came, but the developers had a different plan." Karen looked like she wanted to throttle me. "And let me guess. That plan involved you." I gave her a slow nod. "Correct. They sold the rights to a private investor." I tapped my chest. "Me." Someone in the crowd gasped. Karen's face twisted into disbelief. "You're lying," she said. I shrugged. "Check the records. It's all there. I own the rights to every single drop of water that comes into this neighborhood. The city never bought them back, and the HOA, well, they never even realized it wasn't city-controlled to begin with." The weight of the situation began to dawn on Karen. "Which means," I continued, "when you drained my pool and decided to impose ridiculous water conservation fees, you were making demands on something you had no authority over." Karen's hands clenched into fists. "You can't just turn off the water." I grinned. "Can't I?" The homeowners murmured louder, whispers of rebellion spreading. The HOA had always been overreaching, but now? Now they were completely exposed. Karen took a shaky breath, eyes darting around as she realized she was losing control. "Fine. You win. Turn it back on." I clicked my tongue. "Oh, Karen, it's not that simple. You see, water distribution is a business, and given how the HOA has been running things, I'm afraid I can't offer the same courtesy pricing as before." Her face turned an alarming shade of red. "You're holding the neighborhood hostage?" I raised an eyebrow. "No, Karen. I'm simply giving the homeowners a choice. They can either continue paying outrageous HOA fees for nothing, or they can purchase water directly from me at fair, reasonable rates." It was a masterpiece. The HOA had spent years milking the homeowners dry with fees and rules. Now they were powerless. Karen knew it. I could see the defeat creeping into her expression. Then one of the residents, an older man who had been at the HOA's mercy for years, spoke up. "You know what? I'm sick of the HOA. I'll buy my water from Ethan." Another voice chimed in. "Same here." Then another. And another. Karen's eyes widened in horror as she watched her power slip away. This wasn't just about the water anymore. This was the beginning of the end for the HOA. Karen looked like she was about to explode. Her face was turning redder by the second, her hands shaking as she tried to maintain her usual composed demeanor. But there was no coming back from this. The crowd around her was already shifting. The same homeowners who once feared her power were now standing taller, looking at her with something between amusement and contempt. They had spent years trapped under the HOA's absurd rules, and now they had an out, an alternative. One that didn't involve paying Karen's ridiculous fines or obeying her every command. She took a deep breath, straightened her clipboard like it was some kind of lifeline, and turned to the board members behind her. "We're not finished here," she hissed under her breath before storming back into the HOA office. The other board members hesitated before following her inside, exchanging nervous glances. I didn't bother chasing her down. There was no need. The damage was already done, and I knew exactly what her next move was going to be. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat, even when she had already lost. No, she would double down, fight back, and in doing so, she would dig herself into an even deeper hole. I let the crowd disperse, nodding and shaking hands with the homeowners who had already declared their support. A few asked how soon they could switch over to my water services. I assured them that the transition would be smooth, though I made a point not to rush. The longer the HOA suffered without control, the better. Inside the HOA office, the board members were arguing. I didn't have to eavesdrop to know what was being said. Karen was likely barking orders, demanding they find some legal loophole to regain control. But there was none. The water rights were in my name, legally and undeniably. Even if they attempted to challenge me in court, they would lose. Later that afternoon, I received an email from the HOA's official account. It was a formal notice stating that the HOA would be taking emergency action to ensure water stability in the neighborhood. It sounded serious, but I knew what it really meant. Karen was about to pull a desperate move. That night, I sat on my porch, watching as a few HOA board members crept around in the dark, whispering among themselves. I didn't even have to guess what they were doing. They thought they could bypass me. Maybe they believed that if they called in a favor from someone at the city, they could override my right. Maybe they thought they could strike some under-the-table deal. It didn't matter. Because while Karen was scrambling in the background, something else was happening that she didn't see coming. The homeowners were turning against her at an alarming speed. The next morning, another crowd formed, this time in front of the HOA office, but it wasn't a protest. It was a demand. People were furious, not just about the water situation but about everything. The unnecessary fines. The ridiculous rules. The fact that the HOA had been sucking money out of their pockets for years without actually providing anything in return. Karen emerged from the office, looking exhausted but still defiant. She tried to calm the crowd, saying that she had assurances from the city and that water would be restored soon. But people weren't buying it anymore. Then the votes started coming in. In every HOA, there's a clause that allows homeowners to call for a vote of no confidence in the leadership. It rarely happens because people either don't care enough or assume it won't change anything. But this time, the homeowners were fired up. They had seen the cracks in the system, and now they were ready to break it apart completely. I didn't even have to lead the charge. It happened naturally. Karen tried to fight it. She called emergency meetings, sent out desperate emails, even tried to intimidate homeowners into keeping her in power. But it was useless. The votes were piling up. People were done with her. By the end of the week, it was official. The HOA was dissolved. The moment it was announced, the entire neighborhood felt lighter. Homeowners celebrated, some popping open bottles of champagne in their driveways. The golf course, once the HOA's crown jewel, was left abandoned, its sprinklers still dry. The ridiculous community center that no one used suddenly became just another building. And Karen? Karen was the last to leave. I saw her standing outside the HOA office, staring at the now empty parking lot. The realization had finally sunk in. She had lost everything. The power, the control, even the absurdly high salary she had been collecting from HOA fees. She spotted me watching and walked over, her steps slower than usual. For the first time in her life, she wasn't marching toward me with authority. She was just another resident now. She stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms. "You planned this," she said, her voice quieter than I expected. I took a sip of my drink. "No, Karen. You did this to yourself." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You think you're a hero? You think the neighborhood's going to be better off without the HOA? I shrugged. I think people are better off when they're not being told how to live their lives by someone who only cares about power. She sighed, rubbing her temples. What happens now? I smirked. Now? You get to find out what it's like to be just another homeowner. No special privileges. No fines to hand out. Just a regular person, paying for their own water like the rest of us. She gave me one last glare, but it was empty. The fight had gone out of her. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her house. A few days later, a moving truck appeared in her driveway. No one was surprised. Karen wasn't the type to stick around after losing control. As the truck pulled away, I raised a glass from my newly refilled pool, watching as the last traces of her rule disappeared down the street. And with that, peace finally returned to the neighborhood.